In the last section, we spoke about how we're going to be working from a starter boilerplate project that already has a little bit of Express code written inside of it. In this section, we're going to clone that project and start to walk through some of the code inside of it. Of course, it's definitely key that you have some reasonable idea of what this boilerplate project is doing for us to be able to effectively say, test it, or add in data migrations, or anything else here, right? So we are going to do a little bit of a walkthrough on this project. Let's first start off by cloning this project to our local machine. We'll then be able to walk through the code inside of it. So here's a link to the GitHub repo where the starter project is hosted. So github.com, my name, Advanced Node Starter. I'm going to open up a new browser tab. I'll paste that link in, and I'm going to visit that repo. All we really want to do right now is clone this repository. So once this repo appears, I'm going to find the clone or download button off here to the right-hand side of the screen. I'll open it up, copy the link, and then I'm going to change on over to my terminal where I'm going to use Git to clone this project to my local machine. All right, so over at my terminal, I'm going to clone the project by writing git clone and then the link itself, like so. So I'll run this. I'll then change into that directory that was just created. So the directory is Advanced Node Starter. And then I'm going to start my code editor up inside of that directory. All right, so we're also going to be installing a couple of dependencies here for this project as well. Let's not forget that we have to do that. But like I said, let's first start off by doing a little bit of a code walkthrough. All right, so off to the left-hand side of my screen, you'll see some of the different files and folders that are included inside this project. This is a pretty typical Express application. I have really not done anything too crazy here. Everything is kicked off from the index.js file. So this file hopefully will look somewhat familiar. At the top, we are requiring in a couple modules. We register a couple models with Mongoose. We set up Passport for handling authentication. We set up our Mongoose instance. We create our Express application. We set up a couple of pieces of middleware. We register our event handlers. We set up some production file serving. And then finally, our app actually starts listening on some given port. I know I might say that this is not anything too crazy, but that definitely seems like a pretty good amount of code. So rather than walking through all this code and reading it line by line, let's take a look at a diagram that's hopefully going to help us get a little bit better understanding of what's going on with all this code. All right. So I put together a diagram that looks very similar to the one that we just looked at a moment ago. All right, so here's the diagram in total, but it's been customized to reflect all the different parts of the actual project that we're working with. So we're going to do a very similar walkthrough to our Express server like we did just a moment ago, but this one has been tailored to the code base that we just cloned. All right, so let's zoom in. There we go. Okay, so again, we start off here in the browser. The project that we just installed is not only an Express application, it also has embedded inside of it a Create React app installation as well. So there is a single page application app included in the project that we just cloned. Now, as a quick aside, if you're not familiar with React and you've never worked with it before, don't sweat it for the purposes of this course. We're going to be working with React just a tiny bit to set up a little bit of file upload stuff later on. But definitely React knowledge is not a necessity here by any means at all. So there is a Create React app project inside of here, but everything else is definitely Express and Node related. So when that Create React app boots up, it might make some type of request to our backend server, the one we just cloned. So we get some type of incoming HTTP request, which flows into a couple of different middleware that are already installed and wired up inside of this project. There's the body parser middleware, which is used for parsing the body of post requests that come into the application. There's a cookie session middleware that handles authentication and maintenance of sessions for incoming requests. And there's also a Passport middleware wired up as well. Passport is intended to handle authentication inside of our app. And this Passport instance has already been wired up inside this project to handle OAuth through Google. So that's how our application is going to be handling authentication. It's all wired up using OAuth through Google service. There's then two groups of routes inside of our application. There's one group of routes for handling authentication, so for kicking off the authentication process, and for logging out, and similar operations to that. There's also a set of routes for handling a resource called blogs. So that's the primary purpose of this starter project that we just installed. It's all about handling blog posts. So creating blogs, listing blogs, showing blogs to the user, pretty much just a very basic resource. Now, that might sound like a pretty boring application, right? Like it's another blog application. Well, to be honest, the app that we just installed and the work that we're going to be doing with it is really not quite so much around this actual resource, and we're really going to be focused around a lot of the code around it. So this application, not quite so much about making some like fancy app with sparkles all over the place. It's really much more about understanding the code behind the scenes. So honestly, working with just blogs as a resource inside this application is really going to be for the best. Trust me. There's one other piece of middleware that I want you to be aware of, and that is the require login middleware. So for any user to get access to any blogs or to create blogs or do anything with them whatsoever, they must be logged into our application. And we'll definitely see that in action very shortly. Now, both the auth routes and the blog routes that are set up inside this application make use of Mongoose models. So all of our data is going to be stored inside of a MongoDB database. There are two models that have been created already inside this project, one to represent a user and one to represent a blog post. And we'll definitely see those in action. So after some request comes in, it will either be handled by our set of authentication routes or blog routes, and then eventually we formulate a response and send it back to the front end of our application. So now that we've got a better idea of how this project is put together, let's install a couple of dependencies to the project, and then we'll be able to actually run it and test it out inside of our browser. So I'm going to flip back over to my terminal where we're going to install these dependencies. Inside of the root project directory, I'm going to immediately run npm install. Now you will recall, as I said just a moment ago, that there's also a React project embedded in here as well. So we have to also install dependencies for that project as well. Two sets of dependencies. I'm going to open up a second terminal window, also based inside this project directory. So any second here. Come on. Waiting for this thing to pop up. All right, let's just let it do its thing. There we go. Okay. There we go. So inside this project directory, you'll see a folder called client. That's where the React app is placed. So I'm going to also change into that client directory, and then I will run npm install in here as well to install dependencies for that React project. Like so. Okay, so two sets of dependencies. Those are going to take a little bit to run. So let's just pause right here. We'll continue in the next video and start making use of this project, actually run it, and get a sense of what it's really doing inside the browser. So I'll see you in just a minute.